Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual farm field trip. We are live today in Tigard, Oregon at Bridgetown Mushrooms. My name is Lacey and I'll be your moderator today. Before we start our tour today, I wanted to go over a few logistics to make sure we have a great experience. We've muted everyone and everyone will remain unmuted throughout the tour so everyone can hear our tour guide clearly. If you have questions, you can send them to us using the chat feature. Please only type questions to use in the chat. That will help us see questions and ask as many as possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce our host and tour guide for today's virtual field trip, Trevor Hubert. Take it away, Trevor.
Hey guys, yeah, my name's Trevor. I own Bridgetown Mushrooms. So I guess I'm just gonna kind of start off by giving you a little introduction of how I got into this. As a kid, I was always really into gardening and just interested in dirt and soil, and we were always kind of playing in the dirt and growing our own vegetables. And as I got older, I started to look into the science behind soil and how soil comes to be. And that kind of led me to mushrooms, as mushrooms in the natural world are breaking down a lot of the trees and things that fall. So like when a tree branch falls off of a tree onto the ground, and the leaves and all of those different elements that are laying on the ground in the fall, the fungus will come in and start to consume those things and break them down, and that ends up creating soil. And so I was reading about soil, and then I started reading about fungus, and I got really wildly inspired about it all. And I started to, cultivate mushrooms from my readings. And so I ended up having about 100 pounds of mushrooms. And next thing I know, I had to figure out what to do with those. And so we ended up, talking to a local grocery store, and Bridgetown Mushrooms was born. And so that's kind of the backstory of how this all happened. But I want to give you guys a brief tour of how mushrooms are grown and how they come to be at your grocery store. So as I said, mushrooms like to eat different elements of biomass in the forest, like wood and leaves and sticks and things like that. So here at Bridgetown Mushrooms, we have kind of a 3-step process. And the first part is we create that, we mimic that same kind of biomass here on site. And so what we do is we get wood pellets, and we can kind of turn over here and take a look. We get these wood pellets that look just like this, and we put them into this mixer right here. And there's a bar in here that puts water in, and we turn it on, and it starts to mix, and the water comes in, and they get hydrated. And so once we have the wood, and this is actually soy hull, so we will use certain agricultural waste products to add in there that help the mushrooms grow. These have like different types of constituents in them that will help the mushrooms grow, like nitrogen. And so those two elements go in there, and the water comes in, and it gets mixed and hydrated really well. And then we will use this device right here, and it slides back and forth. And this circle right here is kind of it's like a measuring cup per se. And so what happens is this slides back, and then a specific amount of that wood and soy hull dump into this container, and then it slides forward, and it comes out of this little chute right here into a plastic bag that looks like this. And then we fold that up, and it ends up looking like this here. So this is a bag that's been filled up with the wood and soy mixture. And then what happens is we have to sterilize that. And so we take those bags and we fold them up, and then we put them into these sterilizers right here. And so what these have in them is there's a little basin of water at the bottom, and there's a heating element that heats that water up, and it makes it boil. And then the steam rises up in here, and it gets to about 200 degrees over a 24-hour period, which kills off all of the other bacteria and mold and fungus that might already exist in that wood, so that we can then add in our mushroom, and it can colonize that wood and start to consume it, much like a plant would with its root system. And so these bags are in here, and then we pull them out, and we will bring them over into our laboratory, which is over here, and we can maybe come over here and take a look at that. And so they'll come into this laboratory, and they'll cool off, and then we'll inoculate them in here. And we can see, say hi, Michael. So Michael's in here inoculating these bags right now. And what that means is he's taking the mushroom and he's putting it into those sterilized bags. And then they come out here and the bag is sealed off. So nothing else can get inside of there except for the mushroom. So it's just the wood and the soy and the water and the mushroom seed itself. And so then we'll take these bags and we'll hand mix them really well, so that this mushroom seed, and maybe we can get a close up on this here. This is kind of the mushroom seed here. And we'll mix that in really well into the bag so that it's spread out. And then the mushroom root system, the mycelium, will start to spread out each one of these little grain granules and will consume this wood substrate here. So this wood is like soil. If I was going to make a comparison to a plant, the wood is the soil, and then the little root system of the plant is called mycelium, and that's going to branch off of these seeds right here and start to consume these mushrooms. So the type of mushrooms we grow are ones that really like wood. And so what happens in nature is these mushrooms will come in and eat the tree, like I said, and then afterwards they create what is called compost. And so then there's another type of mushroom that likes compost, and it will come in and break that compost down even further. And at that point, we basically have soil. And so then the plants can come in and grow on the soil and produce food that we eat. And then the whole life cycle starts again. The plant dies and the fungus comes in and eats the plant, and then it creates soil, and then the plant can come in and eat the soil. And so it's a whole circular system that's happening here with all of these different elements. So in this warehouse, we're producing these blocks, we're sterilizing them, we're inoculating them, we're shaking them, and then we're taking them down to another warehouse down the way here, which is where the mushroom is just actually going to be doing a process which is called colonization. And what that means is just like what we talked about here, the seed of the mushroom is going to be spreading out its roots through the bag, and it's going to be colonizing it. And so what happens is this bag will go from this brown color to a very bright white color. And at that point, we know that we can actually start to birth the mushroom itself. And so I think we could walk down to our colonization warehouse, and I'll show you guys, what's happening down there, and we can kind of take a look at the process down there. But this might be a good time for any questions if we have any. I'm going to walk down this way.
Teachers, if you could type your questions in the chat, please, that'd be great. We do have a few questions.
Okay.
Trevor, what is your favorite type of mushroom to eat?
My favorite type of mushroom is known as the maitake, and that's a type of mushroom that is found on the East Coast. It's also known as hen of the woods or the dancing mushroom. So that mushroom is not something that we have here, naturally on the West Coast, but out on the East Coast, you'll find them in the woods, and we can take them from the woods and cultivate them here in our warehouses. And that particular mushroom has a really amazing, strong umami flavor. And umami is just a word that kind of means sweet, sour, salty, and savory. And so it has this really crazy, flavor profile, but it also has a lot of medicinal value as well. So if you guys have never had that one, I would definitely suggest trying to find it. And it's something that you can find at our farmers markets, or you can buy directly from us, or even at the grocery store sometimes.
Hey, how old were you when you started Bridgetown Mushrooms?
That's a great question. I'm gonna have to think back. I was 30 years old, I believe, at that time, maybe 31. It's hard to remember exactly. It's been so long, but yeah, I was about 30 or 31 when that happened. So.
And then how much soil is in each of your bags?
Our bags are weighed out to 10 pounds, though, that amount could vary. We just use a 10-pound bag, which enables us to grow the most amount of mushrooms within the space that we're working within. So we use a 10-pound bag, and we will end up getting 3 to 4 pounds of mushrooms off each one of those bags, and we can produce about 900 of those bags each week. So a pretty significant amount of mushrooms.
And then Miss McAllister's class wants to know, do you sell the compost or reuse it?
We do sell it. It's about $2 a bag, but you can also pick it up for $50 a truckload. I'm going to walk over here and turn off this air purifier so it's a little less loud in here real quick. There we go. Any other questions before we move on?
Yeah, just a few more.
Sure.
Glen Elementary wants to know, how long does it take for the mushroom to fully grow?
Well, that depends on the species. So as an example, the blue oyster mushroom, from that point where we saw Michael in the lab to when it goes into fruiting is about 10 days. And then the fruiting where the mushroom is actually going to grow out of the bag itself is about another 10 days. So that's a 20-day life cycle. So from start to finish on a blue oyster, we have 20 days. With that being said, that mushroom is a very fast growing mushroom. So we have a lot of other species that we cultivate, and some of them may take up to 4 or 5 months. So it really just depends on which species we're talking about. And that's kind of that's in relation to the metabolism of the mushroom. So kind of like when we eat food, we digest it in about 24 hours as a race, as a human. Some mushrooms will metabolize their food source a little bit slower. So it just depends.
I think that's all the questions we have for right now.
Okay, great. So as I was saying, the seed goes into the mushroom and then it comes down here, and these mushrooms just kind of sit here on these shelves, and we control the temperature and we scrub the air. So we have air filters running all the time. But what happens here, and maybe we can come a little closer here, we can see these brown dots here, and that's the point where that seed was in the inside of the substrate. And you can see the mycelium is growing outward on the bag, and it's colonizing the whole bag. And so what happens is this mushroom here, or this particular shelf, is going to go in to our fruiting chamber this Saturday. So last week we put the seed in this bag. This is a blue oyster, and over this last week, it's been about almost, on Saturday, it will have been 10 days. That mushroom was able to consume all of that wood. And so this white part here is what I was talking about. It's what's called the mycelium. It's basically the same thing as a plant root. And so the plant root, or the mycelium rather, is just growing out around all of this, and it's gathering up all of its potential nutrients in here so that it can then birth the mushroom itself. And then once the mushroom is at full maturity, it will release what is called its spores. And spores are the same thing as a plant seed. So the spores then get carried off into the wind, and they float through the forest, and then they'll land on those dead trees or leaves or whatever it may be, and they'll start to consume it. And so that's kind of the process here. But this room is our colonization space, and like I said, and so you can see the mushroom is almost ready. And if we look right here, we can see this bag is so close to ready, but then there's this little spot right here where there's still a little bit of that wood that's the mushroom starting to consume. And so if we look really close, we can see these little kind of tendrils sticking out right here. And so the mushroom is trying to crawl along and consume the rest of this. And eventually this spot will turn white, probably by tomorrow morning. So it's very quick moving. It's very fast moving. It happens pretty quickly. So I just want to point out one other thing. We have this kind of cool sterilizer over here. The sterilizer on the other side is using steam, and it's creating kind of a steam bath. This sterilizer is a pressure vessel. And so what happens here is it's sealed, and then there is water inside as well, and it will steam, but this one is completely sealed, and so it creates pressure. So this sterilizer can get up to about 250 degrees. It's brand new. We love it. We call this Hank the Tank. So it's our big sterilizer that we have here on site, and it's a lot of fun. So that's kind of what we do here in this room. And now we can move over to the next warehouse where we're actually going to see the mushrooms. But before we do that, was there any other questions?
Yes, we have a few more questions. Miss Thompson's class wants to know, how does the fungus eat the mushroom?
The fungus eats the mushroom. It creates what are called enzymes. And so what it does is it sends out a little strand of mycelium, much like a root, and then it explores what it finds. And so if it finds wood, then it will develop what's called an enzyme. And that enzyme is what is used. It's a compound that is used to break down that wood that's inside, or that it finds, or the leaf or whatever it finds, to break it down and crack its cells open, and then it starts to pull the nutrients it needs out of the wood, and it consumes it. And that's kind of the same process that we do as humans. We will eat our food and it goes into our bellies, and then our bellies will produce a profile of certain enzymes to help break that food down, and then it goes through our digestive tract and so on. So it's a very similar process, and different mushrooms are able to produce different types of enzymes, which enable them to break down different forms of natural biomass. So there's even some mushrooms in the world that have been found to be able to break down plastic. And so there's a lot of studies happening right now about those mushrooms. They have created a certain type of enzyme that can actually consume the plastic and turn it into gas or other organic compounds and really help the earth out. So that's kind of how that goes. We're going to go ahead and step over, but if there's any other questions, please let me know. So now we're moving. So after the blocks are in the colonization room, they get rolled over into this warehouse over here, and this is where we put them into our fruiting chambers. So they come into here, and mushrooms are very much like humans. We share 90% of our DNA with them, and as such, they breathe oxygen. So what we do is we bring the bags into this room, and we make a little cut on the side of the bag, and we can go ahead and step in here. And what I'll show you here is we cut the side of the bag open, and when the mushroom recognizes that it's now able to breathe the oxygen that's out in the atmosphere, it starts its fruiting process. So it makes it so the mushroom itself is akin to like an apple on a tree, right? So it's the fruit of the mushroom, or of the mycelium. And so when it notices that oxygen, it starts to create little baby mushrooms, which we call pins. And so if you look right here, we can see some little baby mushrooms coming out of this bag, and then they're growing up into bigger mushrooms, and then even bigger mushrooms over here. So these mushrooms probably have 1 to 2 days left before they're harvested, and they're boxed up, and they're going to go out to a restaurant, or maybe a grocery store, or maybe our farmer's market, or sometimes we even dry them, and people might make medicine out of them. So there's a lot of different ways that the mushroom might be applied or consumed in the world. But I guess the point is the mushroom comes out here, it feels the oxygen, and it starts to produce. And so the other thing that a mushroom needs is they're about 90% water. And so this chamber in here has a lot of different climate control mechanisms. So what that means is that we're creating humidity in here. And so it's very humid in here. It's about 90% humidity. So what we're doing is we're mimicking the same scenario that would happen in the forest if it were to rain. And so when it rains, that humidity increases, and then the mushroom starts to grow because it knows that it's going to have the water that it needs to be able to produce its mushroom fruiting body, which then enables it to send out its spores. And so if we look right here on this block, we can see these little gills under here. And what these gills have in them is something called a little parathecium. And so this parathecium can shoot the spore out into the world. And so there's this little microscopic seed that kind of comes out of these, and the wind carries it off through the forest, like I was saying, and it will land on different wood substrates, and it will start to consume them. So that's kind of the full life cycle of the mushroom, and everything begins again at that point, and it starts to make the soil, and then the plants can, consume the soil. So Any questions about that?
Yes, so we have a few questions. So Miss
Sure.
Long and Miss McAllister's class wants to know how you can tell if a mushroom is poisonous or not.
Well, there's a lot of different ways to look into that. There's no real straightforward answer. You would have to study a identification book because there's different elements that point to different factors in different mushrooms. So I don't know that I have like a very clear answer for that. It ultimately comes down to identifying each individual mushroom and knowing what you're looking at. And those, you know, that kind of knowledge has just come by a lot of trial and error, and a lot of people have probably gotten sick doing those things. But the reality is there's only about 12 to 15 mushrooms in the known currently that can kill you, and so foraging sometimes comes with a little bit of fear and that people have around it, but it can be really safe if you just know the mushrooms that you're looking for and you know that those are safe. Like a chanterelle, for instance, is a mushroom we have here on the West Coast, and they're all over the forest, and those are really easy to identify. So you can kind of start, if you want to go out in the forest and forage for foods, you might just start out by getting to know that mushroom, the chanterelle, and going and looking for that specifically and not picking other mushrooms. And then you kind of build your knowledge up from there, and then you can look for other mushrooms as you get to know them. So it really comes down to just having an intimate relationship with each species and understanding what they are and what they look like and different traits and physical traits and attributes that they might have.
Cool. So another question that Miss Karen's class has is, how long does it take from the start of the process until you send the mushroom to the grocery store?
It's depends on the species. For the blue oyster, it's about 20 days. So these mushrooms here will get harvested. A lot of them will be harvested today, and they'll be boxed up. And I can maybe show you one of the examples of a box of mushrooms here. Actually, we'll go back here, and I'll pull one out of the fridge so we can. Oh, great. Here's a box here, so we can see this 5-pound box, and this box is going to go to the grocery store just like this. So it'll get filled up a little bit more, and then it'll be taken to the grocery store, and then they'll put them out in the refrigerator, and you'll be able to purchase it there. And then we actually have another kind of mushroom right here, which is known as lion's mane. And so this mushroom, as you can see, kind of looks like a brain, and that just well, it's called the doctrine of signatures, and what it implies is that it might have medicinal compounds that help your brain health. And it just turns out that mushroom does in fact have these compounds. So let's walk back here really quick. And so when you consume lion's mane, it will help stimulate nerve growth factor in the brain and gray matter, and it's very healthy for your brain and your mind. So any other questions?
Yeah, so super interesting. Miss Groner's 4th and 5th grade class are curious how many mushrooms you grow in a year.
How many mushrooms that are grown a year? Was that the question? Let's go around this way. Was that the question? How many mushrooms do we grow in a year?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we grow, somewhere between 25 and 50,000 pounds, depending on the year. So it depends on a wide variety of factors. But this year we'll be growing a lot more than that. We'll probably get close to 100,000 pounds.
Super cool. Another question we have is, how do you harvest the mushrooms?
So we harvest the mushrooms just by picking them off the block. You can go into the mushroom or into the chamber, and you just kind of grab the mushroom and you rock it off of the block, and it will go straight into a basket. And then we take it over to a cutting board and we cut the substrate off of the back of it. So you can kind of look in here really quick. And so somebody's in there harvesting right now. And so they go into those baskets that are right there. And then the basket is then taken over to our table over here. And we just cut the substrate off of the back of that, which is basically the wood or any sort of remaining wood particles that are left on the mushroom. And then they go into the boxes that we just showed a second ago.
Another question we have is, have you ever messed up or made a mistake when growing mushrooms?
Yes, hundreds and hundreds of mistakes. But the beauty of mistakes is a lot of times those are the way we learn. And so it's important to know when you're going through life that mistakes are, a good way to learn about something. And so I like to call them happy mistakes, and I've made hundreds and thousands of mistakes along the process. This is a very delicate process, and it's very prone to mistakes. And so, making a mistake isn't necessarily a bad thing. A lot of times it leads to a really great discovery.
Another question we have is, did you go to school or take special classes to learn about mushrooms?
I did not do either of those things. I just read books, and I had a really strong passion for the mushrooms and learning about these things. So it started with a strong curiosity about where soil came from. And I just read a lot of books, and I kind of became obsessed with it. And I went out into the natural world, and I was crawling around and looking at the forest floor, and it was very wildly inspiring. There's a cascade of colors out there, and it just felt like a really big treasure trove out in the forest, which kind of perpetuated my desire to continue learning about these things and reading about them.
So where can people buy your mushrooms?
Our mushrooms can be purchased at World Foods grocery stores. We do Lake Oswego Market. We do South Waterfront Farmers Market, and a bunch of other markets as well. That you can also buy them off of our website, which is www.bridgetown-mushrooms.com. And we can even deliver to your house if you're in the Portland area.
So we just have two more questions.
Sure.
How many different kinds of mushrooms are there?
There's estimated to be about 10 to 12 million different species, and only about 7 to 10% of those have currently been explored by science. So this is a really cool area of science to study if you're interested in it. There's a lot of potential and a lot of discoveries that could be made that are really new to mankind.
And then our last question, Groner School wants to know, what is your favorite part of growing mushrooms?
My favorite part of growing mushrooms is just seeing the mushrooms themselves, coming in and getting to see these beautiful creatures, and then consuming them, and knowing that these things are very healthy and that they're being distributed out into our communities makes me feel really good about the work that we do here.
Thank you so much, Trevor. That's all the questions we have.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.